Hello. So I seen the Cillian Murphy movie, Small Things Like These, and I had a few things to say on it. Number one, it's a good film, right? It's well shot, well written, heavy in its tone, and evocative, I suppose, because it poses a couple of questions to you, or it draws a couple of questions maybe out of you, right? So I'm just going to skim through the story a little bit as we go, and I'll have a couple of comments to make on each thing, right? Maybe. So Killian Murphy plays the part of Bill Furlong, right? And he's a coalman. I think he's in Wexford, and it's mid 80s, right? So there's an old time feel to Ireland, right? Gloomy. The sun. I don't think the sun shines in the movie at all, right? But it's an interesting one because the way it's shot, it brings you very, very close to the character Bill, right? In terms of proximity, right? So there's a real personal feel to it, right? You're alongside him. You're probably feeling his presence, right? So Bill is, as I said, a coalman, and he seems a little low, kind of a thinker sort of a guy, right? Kind of caught in his own memories to a degree, and you see that as the movie rolls on, right? So the interesting thing about it is, obviously, coalman shows him delivering coal, gets home, takes off the black jacket, and when he goes in home, he goes immediately into a downstairs bathroom, and he takes out a little personal bag of his own, and he takes out what looks like soap and a scrubbing brush, right? And it shows it close up, scrubs his hands, cleans the dirt of the day off it before he goes into his home, right? So out of the bathroom, wash the day away, and into the kitchen where his wife and his daughters are, right? So he has, I think, 4 or 5 daughters and a wife, and that's his family, that's his life, right, in a nutshell. But one of the days, he's delivering coal to one of the laundries, the Magdalen laundries, or to a convent, right? There's a school and the laundries together, right? Big old building, we all know what they look like, right? And as he drops the coal in, he comes out of the shed and he stops and sees a car pulling into the convent or whatever, the laundries. And out of it pops what's probably a mother and her daughter, right? And the mother is ushering the daughter into the laundries, up to the main door of it, right? And the daughter doesn't want to go, and the mother is get in, whatever. You know? And he's kind of fixated on this and just watching, right? But he gets in, he goes home, and over the next few scenes, you see that this is weighing heavy on him, right? So he gets into bed, wife's asleep, he can't sleep. He gets up and just stares out the window of his home, right, onto his kind of street level, right, onto the street. People wandering by, going home from the pub, etc., right? But it's weighing heavy on him. Then we're taken back into Bill's childhood, right? And he is in a fine home, and he's with uh, Catelyn Stark out of Game of Thrones, right? So she is I think the first figure we meet, first female figure in Bill's life that we meet. She's an older lady, and he's about 8 or 9, right? But he's walking around the house, and he looks out the window and sees a woman, younger woman, speaking with a younger man, right? So they're probably in their 20s. And then we come back to Bill, and yeah, so he's speaking to his wife. Christmas is coming up, and he's sitting in the sitting room, away with it, right? Just thinking. And his wife says to him, "Are you okay? Like, you haven't been yourself, right?" And he says, "In what way?" And she says, "You haven't spoken all day," right? And you can see that there's a struggle with Bill, it looks like, right? That he wants to say something, but he's obviously not used to talking or speaking with people. So it becomes stuck in him and heavy, right? And the wife assumes that what he's overthinking about, or what is weighing on him, are the same things that are probably weighing on her, right? And the name of the movie then is Gone Again. simple things like these, or small things like these, right? And what the wife is speaking about is the expense that Christmas will bring, and so we're getting the windows and that done next year in the house, and isn't that great, right? And Bill is just kind of, yeah, 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 yeah. Then, and I probably jumble in the scenes a bit here, but it shows Bill in bed with his wife, right? And he tells her that he's seen the woman in the convent. Again, I think I am jumbling scenes anyway, but right, look, we scratch that. We go with another one of the days. Bill brings a delivery to the nuns. One of the nuns says the delivery is wrong. Bring back this instead of that, right? And Bill brings it back the following morning, or one of the following mornings. And it's early because it's still dark out, right? And he goes to the usual coal shed that he can open and deliver in the fuel. But what he finds in there is, I'm not sure if it's the same girl that was been brought in at the start, but it's a young girl anyway. And she's asleep on the coal in there, right? And he's surprised by this, and he's like, "You okay?" And the girl starts to talk, and she's saying that I think she's 4 months pregnant, and she was locked in there, right? So Bill brings her up, dusts her off, and brings her back to the nuns, knocks on the door. The nuns bring her in, right? Or yeah, the nuns bring her in, and then the head nun, the mother, Bill calls her the mother as well, brings Bill into the office, says to the two other nuns to bring the girl off, to clean her off, and bring her back in. And it's, oh, how did this happen? What were you doing out in the shed, sort of a thing, right? So the older nun brings Bill into the room. She says, "I'll pay you for the fuel. I have my purse in the room. Come into the office, sit down, we'll have a cup of tea," right? And while the other two nuns bring the girl off to dress her up and clean her off. And the nun starts to speak to Bill about his daughters, right? So isn't so-and-so heading off to college and she's doing her junior or leaving or whatever? Bill says, "Yeah, she is, yeah, great." And the nun agrees, "Yeah, she's a fine girl, smart, and she'll do good things," right? And then she says, "How many others have you have?" And he names out four more other daughters, right? And she says, "Oh, that's good, and hopefully, like, the school is in there, and it's difficult to get places now, and we'll do our best for you, right?" So you can see what the nun is angling at here, right? So she also sticks it into Bill a bit and says, "You must be disappointed that you never had a son to carry your name on, right?" And Bill says, "I carry my mother's name." And we're kind of getting the picture that maybe Bill's mother could have been one of these girls, right? And Bill comes to that conclusion as well, or realizes that himself if he didn't already know, right? And the older woman that we see in Catelyn Stark in the home that Bill was living in as a child, she took Bill's mother in with Bill, right? And housed them and homed them. So Bill have a bit of allegiance to it, right? He could have very easily gone down, his mother could have very easily gone down the road of this young girl that was locked into the coal shed, right? So the young girl comes in, they have tea together, the nun gives her cake and is lovely to her, and she gets the girl to say, "How did that happen?" "It was just a game," the girl says. "It was just a game, the other girls did it." And then she said it was nothing. And the mother nun, whatever you call them, the nun, head nun, she agrees it was nothing. Get off the bed, girl, and that's it then, right? And so the girl and the nuns go, and we were left with Bill and the mother, the head nun again. And she offers the Bill, she pays him, and then she writes out a Christmas card, and she puts money into it, right? £30 or something, it looks like. Back in the 80s, right? Mid-80s. Good money, nice money. And she gives the card to Bill and says, "That's for your wife," right? And again, I'm jumbling scenes in that, but Bill takes the card and heads off, right? And a conversation with his wife then is around the idea that he found the girl in the shed, and he's obviously weighing on him. He's heavy with it, right? And the wife is not really interested. It is a case of, it's none of our business. We should have no interest in these kids. Just turn a blind eye because that's what everyone else is doing, right? It's none of our business, and you'll be drawing unwanted attention onto yourself if you're to talk about this or complain about it in any way, right? valid enough, at least in terms of the movie, right? That's the scene that's been set in the movie. And so Bill is obviously wrestling with this then, right? So he goes into town on a Christmas night, staff night out or whatever. Him and the boys in the coal shed are gone to the pub. Bill is paying for it. He's drinking a cup of tea. He then goes in and talks to the owner of the pub, right, behind the scenes. So he's paying her, putting money behind the bar, and he's talking to her, and she's saying a similar thing that his wife was saying, right, that you want your girls to get on, essentially. And if you kick up a fuss about this, Bill, people will look at you different, right? And you will be drawn the social ire of people onto yourself. And your girls will bear the brunt of that, right? So ignore what you're seeing, ignore what you've seen, don't pursue it, don't give out about it, because you as an individual then will suffer from the rest of society, because they won't like that. It won't be favourable to you, okay? And then there's a little mass scene. The head nun then is leading the mass, right? Leading the chorus, whatever. And then we have Bill at home, and the wife says, did the nun give you a Christmas card from me? He says, yeah, forgot about it. Sorry, here. And she's saying, how did you forget about it? Like, now it looks like we're ungrateful, right? That the fact that she didn't go and thank the nun for it, because she didn't know about it, right? So that's what her concern is. It's social approval and not looking out of place, not putting a foot wrong, right? And that is further from where Bill is at. Bill is caught up with what he's after seeing, and you feel that. I felt it anyway watching it, right? So Bill, he goes essentially back to the nuns, back to the coal shed, and he finds the girl in there again, okay? And he brings the girl home. And it's interesting as well, because you see 2 or 3 times, I think, with Bill getting home from work and washing the dirt from his hands before he steps into his main home, right? So there's a little bathroom just inside the kitchen, just inside the front door. Goes in, washes the dirt from the day away before he presents himself to his family, right? And this time he goes in and he's washing, scrubbing, and he kind of just loses it for a couple of seconds, right? He doesn't wash all the dirt off. Symbolic, right? But he comes back out, he takes the girl's hand, and he walks into the kitchen where his wife and daughters are. And from the viewer's perspective, the camera is at the front door, so you're watching this happening. And naturally you want to see what the wife's reaction is, right? But you don't. It just cuts to the credits. Actually, it cuts to a statement of, in memory of the 56 or 59,000 girls that were put into these laundries, right? And the movie ends, right? So Bill, essentially, in the washing of his hands and bringing the girl home, he's brought the dirt from society into his home now, right? And it's a fascinating one, because not that it's the obvious thing to get involved with the movie is, the Catholic Church and the nuns and the laundries and the babies being sold for adoption and whatever else happened to them, right? And tomb and all of that sort of stuff you start thinking of, right? But the movie, in comparison to maybe, I can't think of the other one, You're Not a Man of God, that movie, the Magdalene Sisters, I think was the name of it, or the Magdalene Girls. That's really, really heavy on the control that the nuns or the priests had over people. But this movie, not so much so. It's delivered in a more subtle form, right? And the emphasis seems to be on the people that turned a blind eye and didn't say anything, didn't challenge the status quo, right? To save their skin, to not draw the ire of others onto them, right? So they'll ignore what they know is a bad thing for the sake of social approval or getting along, right? And just burying their head in the sand and going along and not overturning the apple cart, right? And the last scene then is the camera at the door, as I was saying, as Bill and the girl are walking in. And I suppose the question to it then is, well, what would you do in this situation? And as there's been enough time, not a massive amount of time, but there's been enough time between what was going on with the nuns and the priests and the church and Irish people and all that sort of stuff, and the total domination of people's minds. It wasn't necessarily, in most cases, a foot on the neck sort of a thing, but it's in people's minds, right? You don't object to those who dictate things, right? So the nun had control over the schools, and if you wanted your kids to get along, you better get along, right? Because otherwise, well, we've no places, and your kids are out of school, and all that sort of stuff. But there's been enough time separating that Irish people, on the whole, I would say, if you ask people one to one, I would suggest that most people would think that if I was back in those days, I would have said something, right? And this is what's really interesting about this movie. That, or what I took from it anyway, or what it brought out in me, is the question of social conformity. I'm not primarily interested in the effect that the church had, or what those who were employed by the church done to people here anyway, right? So while that's really valid and intense and historical and real for people and life destroying for people, the emphasis on the social conformity thing is more interesting to me in this regard because it's more prevalent, right? It gets to the crux of things. Because yes, we had the control system of the church, and we had movies censored, literature censored, certain dancing censored, all that sort of stuff, right? And then you flip forward to now, and most people will probably think, I wouldn't have went along with that. So that's a big load of nonsense. I wouldn't have bothered with that. But a lot of the people in the movie thought the same thing, right? But they buckled to it because of the pressure of social conformity, right? The desire to fit in and not stick out, not stand up, right? And this is explicitly stated by people in it. It's not like no one really knew what was going on, sort of a thing, right? The movie is portraying it that everyone did know what was going on, but they turned a blind eye to it. And I would suggest that there's a lot of people that did know, a lot of people that didn't, right? And the people that just buried their head and went along, right? And people just weren't interested. Or people that thought it was justified, right? That it was justified, that these girls are a scourge on the earth and they should be flung into homes and their babies taken and whatever else done with them, right? The nuns and priests are right and correct because they're people of God, right? And I believe that and I bow to that. A load of different types of people, right? But back to the question of what would you have done? And for those who think they would have said something at the time, I would bring your attention back to the last 4 or 5 years when you had a similar pressure in society to go along, to not question anything, to do what you're told essentially, and to do what everyone else was doing and don't rock the boat, right? What did you do then? Because you're dealing with a very similar thing. People in influential positions in society who pulled a few levers, right? Pulled strings and put pressure on people to react a certain way, right? So the question is, what would you do? And what did you do? Because it's great, you know, because no longer do we get to look at what happened in Ireland or what we believe happened in Ireland, whatever way, and fill ourselves with a sense of present day grandiosity, right? That we wouldn't have looked, we see that as foolish now, and we wouldn't have done anything like that, and we would have been outside those laundries demanding they release these girls, right? Fair enough, you may have, but we have a present scenario or recent scenario where the same machinations were involved, the same pressures to conform and do what you were told were at play, right? So what did you do then? And I like that the movie went at that angle, the social pressure, right, of just bury your head and get along, because I think it's aimed at something that I think is stopping Irish people from moving forward, right? And that is, we have a lot in the past to rectify with. And a lot of that is the very fact that people did bury their heads and just go along to get along because they didn't want to bring the ire of the church or the ire of the nuns or priests or the people in the pulpits or the pews that didn't want to draw that onto them. So they allowed horrible things to happen in their own villages, towns, and cities because it wasn't directly affecting them, right? And I think that's the great takeaway. Another takeaway is that there appears to be a system, or there appears to have been systems continuously at play where the controllers in our country at least have come up with different ways of extracting and taking away children from the parents, from their Irish parents, right? And you see it through the condemnation of premarital sex and being born out of wedlock, being born a bastard child, and having, therefore you should be taken from your mother, right? Or from your parents even. And we see a similar thing going on now as well, where with the children's rights stuff, and because the children have rights now, as like it's a nonsense, right? You have human rights, and children are humans too. Therefore, they should just fall under that category the same with everyone else. What is the need for the specific children's rights? And what that can lead to is an excessive government overreach of taking children from Irish families for a multitude of reasons, right? So it seems that whatever the controlling system is in Ireland, it leverages its power and authority in such a way that it allows it to extract children from Irish families, which I think is an issue, right? A massive issue. And it's not so explicit now as there's the laundries and look at all these tainted women, right? And the children of these tainted women that are of the devil and have no use, right? It's not as in your face as that, right? But it's still there, right? We family courts where children are taken away from their families every day, and you're not allowed to know what's going on inside in there. You know, so it's a similar thing. And yes, I know, and I probably should have started with this, but people are going to say we are living in this woke, liberal, crazy house where they're trying to do, those who are manufacturing and steering it are doing their best to sever the ties that we Irish people have with our own history and the religion that we adhere to for so long in this country. Therefore, we shouldn't react to what has come before with scorn or anything like that, because that's playing into this atheistic sort of narrative that you have currently. And I get that. But I would say to you, it's not a case of black or white. You can disagree with both, right? You can understand and recognize that what happened in Ireland via Roman Catholicism and the people in the different layers of that controlling thing was catastrophic to Irish people. It was disgusting. It was craziness. But you can also recognize that what's going on today is just the same thing. It's just the very same thing. And this is why I want to draw people's attention back to the social element of it, of kind of keeping each other in line and don't give out, don't draw attention, you know, because bad things will happen to you. So just allow the bad things to happen to someone else, and that way we'll get along just fine. And we can entertain ourselves with the small little things like these, right? The conversations about Christmas trees and presents and shoes and trivia stuff, right? And never address any of the bigger questions in our society, right? So I understand that people are a little bit hesitant because they have an allegiance or a fondness for what came before, right? In terms of the church and religion and I suppose the binding force that had for society. So they don't want to look at it through any negative lens. But I would suggest you don't have to look at it through a negative lens. Just look at it for what it was. Look at the truth of it. And if the truth of the thing is that it was bad in certain areas, then you just admit that, and that's fine, right? You can hold on to whatever little goodness you might have taken from it yourself. But on the whole, thousands of children went missing, were sold, Women's lives were ruined because of our allegiance to that top-down system of Roman Catholicism, right? And we could do another talk where we look at the potential good of that, right? And one of those people would say is that in comparison to today, it gave people something to orient themselves around, right? We met at church, that stuff. We had a pillar which we all circumnavigated, right? And that was the central pillar of our culture and our society. I would suggest that that's a case of Stockholm syndrome to me, right? Because there's different people, different types of people, and some types of people just want to fit in with everyone else and go do what everyone else is doing. But that's not good enough for me, right? I want to know what's true and what is worthwhile and what is honest. And I don't believe that system was worthwhile or true or honest from the top down, just in terms of how it is structured, even in terms of how the metaphysical outlook that it has, where you orient your whole life towards the future and you give up essentially your life in this world for the sake of potential goodness when you die. I don't like that. I think that's an awful ethic to offer people. And I think a lot of people took that, right? And I think you see now politicians carry that same sort of metaphysic to people, right? That the best thing for being is to delay what is good in the moment for what might be good in the future, right? I think that's a scandalous thing to sell to people. I think it's disgusting, and I think it ruins lives. And I would also suggest that what you're seeing today is a direct carryover from where we've been over the last, we'd say, 100 years, right? Longer going back, but consolidated Catholicism in Ireland, famine, post-famine leading up, right? Because there was always different kind of perspectives in that. And even, yeah, I won't even get into that, but consolidated Catholicism in Ireland, absolutely the 20th century, post-famine 20th century. And I don't believe that in and of itself was good for Irish people. However, I do believe that the Irish people made the best of that situation and poured ourselves into that system and into that religious outlook, and we flavoured it according to the goodness in Irish people. I do not believe that any goodness came from that thing in itself, right? I don't believe that. I think that based on the philosophical outlook and worldview of that system, there is no goodness in it. There is no goodness in it. So any goodness that was related to Irish Catholicism or Irish culture being consolidated in Catholicism is down to Irish people, right? So, but yeah, look, I'll wrap that up now anyway. And again, I would bring it back to the social conformity, the pressures to coexist with your other people, when the price of coexistence with your other people is to blindly accept and do exactly what they're doing too. And I think that is far more prevalent in Irish society today than people would care to admit, right? And I think there's a massive hangover from the 20th century, whole history, but there's no need to go back 1,000 years, although you can if you want, right? We can just focus on post-famine 20th century. And I think there's a massive hangover from that because people are reluctant to accept the fact that we allowed terrible things to happen to our own people, so long as it didn't touch our front door, right? And that's why I think the cleaning off the dirt of his hands before he steps into his kitchen and home to his family is a good little symbol of that, because he made sure he got rid of the dirt of the day before he went in, up until the point where he couldn't anymore, and he brought the girl home, right? So an interesting watch, but the main interest for me is not so much in the movie, although it's well shot, well made and all that sort of stuff, but in the questions that it poses, right? And one of them is, do you think you would have done anything different or the same as him? And if so, you would have done the same thing and done what was right and brought the girl home into safety. Is that consistent with your behaviour and your attitude after over the last 4 or 5 years as well, right? So I think these are massive questions that are still unanswered, and I think it's going to hinder us going forward, because Same way if you're dealing with a client in a one-to-one, right? So you're in a therapy session, one-to-one, client has horrendous things happen in their childhood, and you're just trying to tell them should be positive, right? And sure, what your friends doing, just do the same thing, and there's no real need to look back on that stuff because it's gone now, and sure, aren't you still here now, sort of a thing. That doesn't work, right? That's nonsense. You have to reckon with your past, right? And the same way an individual will have to reckon with his past, make sense of it, and heal, so too with a nation, right? I don't think we've even started that conversation yet because you see, unfortunately, you see the dialectic at play, right, where you have this stupidity of worldviews offered on this hand, and then you have what came before on the other hand, and because we hate this and resist this and don't want this, we'll naturally just gravitate back to what came before. Who wins there, right? Either way, you're still being controlled and dominated, right, and your children taken from you, either way, right? So those are my thoughts on that. I'd recommend watching it. Why not? You're going to see reactions from it, and you're going to see people come out staunchly and defend the Catholic faith, or not even the faith, right? The Catholic system. And I think people get that confused, right? If you want to have your own personal relationship with Jesus and what is Catholic, right? Off you go, off you go. But allow for the fact that others won't and don't, right? And please be open to the idea that in the name of those things, brutality came, right? It's the same with the system you're looking at today. In the name of equality and equity and fairness and children's rights, brutality is there, right? It's the same thing. Every age, the controlling mechanism just changes its face to suit the mood or the mind of the people, right? And it leads people astray. And until we reckon with that, the central question of why would I refuse to act in accordance with my own principles, my own values, and my own senses, what I'm seeing, what I feel, and what I believe in the world, and what I care about. Why would I forego acting on those things for the sake of social approval or for the sake of not standing out in any way? Because that's the central question of all time, right? The main question. Horrible things happen when you capitulate and conform. Simple as that. You then offer up the responsibility of everything in your life to other people, and terrible things happen.